we are really honoured and pleased to have Dr. James Brown with us today. He's the author of The Handbook of Program Management from McGraw-Hill, one of the best-selling items in the program management category. I'm sure you can probably find it on Amazon, get it on your Kindle, and learn more after this podcast. But not just an author and an academic. James has also worked with a load of big companies, so John Deere, Adobe, Michelin, Siemens have worked with James, had him in a leadership capacity, training capacity, providing kind of project management best practice to support their endeavors. So, and obviously Stuart said a few kind words about him, but even greater importance, we have a sort of advocacy here from a NASA chief engineer who describes James as basically brilliant at leading people and getting results, and a leader in training, systems, analysis, facilitation. So without further ado, I'll hand over to James, who is going to take us on this webinar.
All right, very good, and thank you very much. I'm glad to see everybody today, and we are going to start out with a polling question today. And so you should see the poll now, and the question is simply this. The question is simply this. My organizational leaders say everything is top priority. My organizational leaders say everything is top priority. The choices are all the time, when it suits them, sometimes, and never. All the time, when it suits them, sometimes, and never. So I'll give you a moment to do that. Some of you may have been told this very recently, maybe even this morning before you got on this webinar. I don't know, so we shall see. All right, I will share the results. All right, and so we have 37% that say all the time, we have 48% that say when it suits them, and 15% that says sometimes, and nobody is really happy with the never here. So this is something that when we say everything is top priority, is something that really does not basically exist. There is no such thing as everything is top priority. No such thing, because I can do children's math. And if children's math will tell you if everything is top priority, it's equal. And if everything is equal priority, then there's no difference between the statement everything is top priority and everything is bottom priority. It's the same exact statement mathematically. And so therefore, if somebody out there might need to be muted, but if your boss tells you this, then they're really telling you that I don't want to be the leader. That's what they're saying. And whenever you hear everything is top priority, in your mind, you should say slacker, unworthy of the position you are in. Do not say it out loud. All right. So, but if you've ever said this before, I forgive you. But if you say this any point in time in the future, I want you to toss and turn at night. I want you to your significant other to say, what's wrong, dear? And you say, well, I said everything is top priority today. So this is not something that we do. We have to prioritize. Leaders put things in priority order. That's what they do. That is the role of the leader. And that deals with projects, and it deals with every other aspect of project management. So leadership and prioritization. Great organizations know and communicate their values. I watch a lot of business programming, and whenever you see a company in trouble, the CEO or some high-level leader is on TV and they make this statement: we got away from our core values. All right, they say we got away from our core values. So this is one of the things we have to do. So we select projects and allocate resources based on those values without exceeding workforce capacity. We establish priority order for the project and activity so the workforce knows what's most important. This provides a sense of direction. And when I say priority order, I don't know why I have to say this. If you're on this webinar, I probably don't have to say it to you. But when I deal with companies, they think priority order is this. We've got 44 priority 1 projects, and we've got 16 priority 2 projects, and that is not priority order. Priority order is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That means we put one in front of the other. So this requires discipline and integrity. Project management itself, portfolio management itself is not difficult. All right. It does require discipline and integrity. It is not something that is ultra complicated. And what we're going to talk about today, analytic hierarchy process, has a complicated name, but it's not complicated either. All right, but do we have the discipline and integrity? This chart can be very depressing. I take no responsibility if you have to drink an amber liquid after you digest this chart. That is up to you. But many organizations put their personnel in a position where they fail at a project. And they do that because they overload the workforce. On this chart, waiting time and system utilization. As system utilization approaches 100%, waiting time or interference in the system grows exponentially. And let me say it a different way. Your organization will get more projects done at 90% capacity than you will at 100% capacity. You will get more projects done. And if you don't believe me, let's just take an example here. If your computer, if your memory gets above 90% full, what happens? It slows down. If your hard drive gets above 90% full, it slows down. And so these are things that happen in any system. It cannot be escaped. So the role of the leader here is to assure that we are operating around 90% capacity. It doesn't matter if you peak over 90% for short windows of time, but if you live above 90%, your organization is characterized by this. Some of you may feel this. It is characterized by a lot of starting and stopping, starting and stopping, starting and stopping, where we start this activity and you think you're working on this project, and then the next thing you know, somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, we need to go vector over here, we need to vector over there, and it becomes very inefficient. And so this is one of the things that we have to do. There was a launch director that worked for NASA. He launched more space shuttles than anybody, and he was famous for getting the space shuttle off the ground. He was famous for just being able to expedite things. And so much so that if it was a cloudy day in Florida, the launch team would say this. They would say, don't worry, Seek will find a hole in the clouds. All right, that he would find a hole in the clouds to get the space shuttle off. And I interviewed him for my book research. And one of the things he told me was this. He says, people think that I'm the expediter. People think that I'm trying to get everything off the ground. But he says, my role as the leader is to slow things down. My role as the leader is to make sure everything is done right. My role as the leader is to stop the launch if it's not. All right. And sometimes leaders mistake their role as expediters when often everybody's trying to get stuff done in a hurry. The leader's role is to make sure it's being done right, to put people in the position where you maximize their success. And that cannot be done unless we don't operate in this excess capacity region. So we have to make sure that we slow it down to that degree. And you can't do that unless you're doing good portfolio management. And so we have another poll in question here for you. And I will be interested in the results of this one. Very simple. My organization has its projects in priority order. 1, 2, 3, 4. Priority order. Oh, we're voting fast on this. No need to hesitate on this polling question. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, I will share the results here. We have 70% or 71% that say false and 29% true. This is so critical because most of us have more work than we can do in a week. Most of us have more work than we can do in a day. And when we have that, we have to make a choice on what work do we work on. And we should be able to go and look at the priority list and say, this is what I should be working on. In the absence of a priority list, do you know what people work on? They work on what they like. They work on what somebody is screaming about. And they work on what is short term. All right. That doesn't mean they work on what's most important. So from this point of view, we have to make sure that we work on what is most important. If I have a team of 14 people, I want them working on what's most important. Imagine if I have a team of 14 people and I don't have a priority list, what is the likelihood that all 14 people are working on the most important thing? Close to zero. And so this is just one of the things that we sometimes leaders build inefficiency into a system when they don't take care of this stuff. And this is in part the reason I wrote a book on program management and not project management. It's my opinion that project managers are often put in positions that does not maximize their success by the people above them. All right, so this means that if we're going to put things in priority order, that we got to select projects. And this is one of the things that we have to do. So when we talk about project selection, it should be credible, something that is easy to use, easily understood, defensible, logical, traceable. And this last one here says link to the organizational values, okay? Link to the organizational values and buy-in from the stakeholder community. It shouldn't be something that is a black box. It shouldn't be something that is so complicated that you have to have a deep scientific background to understand. It has to be something that is simple. Right now, you're going to have to forgive me here because I'm going to be very direct. All of these financial measures where people like to say, what's the IRR? Tell me the IRR on this project and all of that kind of stuff. The reason we use that is because people are taught it in school when they get their MBAs, and often they're taught by people that did not work in the work environment, that have no experience outside of academia. All right, these methods are something that you can calculate, but they are very real world challenged. And I'm not just saying this. You see the quote here I have from Robert G. Cooper here, where it says, these methods are extremely popular selection approaches, but don't be fooled. The businesses with the poorest performing portfolios rely almost exclusively on financial selection approaches, according to our research. All right, so it's not just me that says this, but, and this is a really easy challenge to explain. Look at the speed of technology today. Look at how fast it changes. Look at the upset we have now with AI. And when you use any of these methods, you're doing a forecast of revenue and costs. And who can forecast that well in today's environment? Very few. And if you can't, if you use these methods, you use them at your peril, is what I would say.
And James, just jumping into this, right? One of the things I talk about on that is that, you know, when you use these financial metrics, they don't have a direction. It's just money. But your strategy has a direction. So if you're working for Rolls-Royce, right, the best car maker in the world, you could come up with a really cool project, save you $10 million, right? The ROI will be off the chart. The ROI is off the chart. But if that project reduces the quality of the product, that's taking you in exactly the wrong direction as a business, right? And so these financial metrics don't have any concept of the direction of the business, those organizational values, the drivers that you were talking about earlier. So 100% with that one, really big deal. Now you're going on to my favorite topic of all. What is, hey, James, what is AHP?
Yeah, that is true. What is AHP? AHP deals with values that takes you beyond the financial measures that Stuart just mentioned. And it is true. If you do everything on a financial measure, then the companies will get in trouble. I've seen companies that somebody from the accounting background gets in charge, and then all of a sudden things start to go downhill over a period of years because they aren't paying attention to those things. So analytic hierarchy process, I actually hate that the creator named it this because it drives people away. That term right there, you say it sounds like, okay, I don't want to learn about that. And then the second bullet here makes it worse, a multi-criteria decision-making method. All right, so yes, that's true, but basically it's an easily understood, credible method to select projects based on organizational leadership values. I've used it many times with success. This quote here is from an article where the creator Sadi talked about how he created it. And it says, it dawned on Sadi that what he needed and what grandma had come up with in a rudimentary way was a process that captured intensities of human feeling and assigned them numerical values. He looked at the way his grandmother prioritized things around the house, and he came up with this mathematical construct for prioritizing projects. All right.
And by the way, James, I was speaking with Sati's widow, sadly Tom passed a few years ago, a couple of months ago, and I asked her, was this story true? The story that it came from his grandma? It was absolutely true.
Awesome.
Absolutely true.
Yeah, and so, you know, things don't have to be complicated, but some people try to make things complicated, but they do not. And so this is not a complicated process per se, and it is worth doing it. So it uses pairwise comparisons as a basis. And basically that means you can't let people talk out of both sides of your mouth. There are leaders, and hopefully you don't work for people that they like to say everything is important. This is important. Customer satisfaction is important. Cost savings is important. Well, with pairwise comparisons, you have to say one thing is more important than another thing. All right. And that is what we do. So as a result of the pairwise comparisons and the weighting, we create a value structure. And then the projects are selected head to head against the prioritized values. I've also done checklist scoring against the values. Or I've also done checklist scoring against a gold standard project. So every project doesn't always have to be compared head to head. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Here are the advantages. The squeaky wheel. In some companies, they play what I call the yelling game, where he who yells the loudest is the person that gets the resources. And then this is a game that just feeds upon itself. So once you have the priority structure, it establishes cooperation among the leaders and stakeholders. And this last bullet here, it allows comparison of quantitative and qualitative factors. Quantitative and qualitative factors. And so when someone tells you, you're comparing apples and oranges, you know what you say? Yes, I am. And I'm going to compare cucumbers and grapes later. So you just get ready for it. All right. I can do that with AHP. I can compare quantitative and qualitative factors against each other. All right. This hierarchical structure effectively manages complexity. I can do complete analysis of the decision. I can do all the what if I want that would change the decision. I can separate the individuals from the group. I can tell if somebody's playing political games by the consistency score that they have. So if I have a leader that's playing politics, I can find that out, and has a history of success in government and industry. And I would say that these bullets do not do just, if you facilitated this before, these bullets do not do justice to the power of it, because what this tool allows you to do is to drill down to the specific areas and factors where people disagree. So I can wade through a bunch of garbage and crap that you might have 4 hours of discussion about where people are arguing about. I can wade through that 4 hours and in 5 minutes or less, get right to the specific aspects of the decision process where people may disagree and have a focused discussion. And after that focused discussion, there's understanding of, I understand why you feel that way, and we understand why we feel that way. We had an incident where I was working with NASA, and one of the factors was to do some things to save the vehicle. And one of the panelists was an astronaut, and the astronaut voted against saving the vehicle. He voted all the money to be spent. Voted against saving the crew in the event of a catastrophic failure. He voted all his resources for saving the vehicle, whereas most of the bureaucrats voted to save the astronauts. And he says, I don't want you to try to save me after it goes kaboom. I want you to try to save me before it goes kaboom. I don't want to spend any money on a scheme that's going to do that. But that didn't come out until we examined the voting of the individuals, and we got to focus on the discussion, which this allows you to do. So when we do analytic hierarchy process, when you start out, it's important to have definitions on what you say you value. All right. So I have this question here: what is safety? That's to trigger me to tell you that NASA was trying to prioritize some projects based on safety after one of their shuttle tragedies, after the second tragedy. And a team had been working for months and they hadn't made any progress, and they called me in to help them. They were not happy about it, but I was called in to help them. And so I started the consulting day out, and I asked this simple question: what is safety? And it was an interesting answer, because one person said, oh, I'm dealing with NASA engineers, so it's always funny. Oh, safety is defined in NSDSO 7700, paragraph 3.2.4.7 says safety is this. All right. And then somebody else says safety is this. And then somebody else says safety is that. And a day and a half later, I had a definition of safety they could all agree on. a day and a half, I had a definition of safety they could all agree on. And that's the reason they had not been making progress for months. It was because everybody's talking like they all have an understanding of safety, and they all do have an understanding of safety. It's the understanding that they have in their mind. It's not the understanding that they have agreed upon as a group. And so when I'm gonna let you jump in here, Stuart. And so when I start this process out and I say, what is the value, what is cost, or what is schedule? Cost can mean many things to many different people in an organization or a company. And if you don't write it down, you don't understand it. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the one where we see this all the time, James, is the word risk, right? Because risk can mean the risk of the project going on. It could be the risk to the business if we don't do this project. It could be the risk of something exploding. It can be anything, right? So if you ever see a criterion, or if one of your leaders uses that word risk, right? Remember the story about the day and a half to get to a definition of safety, and just ask them, what do you mean by risk? And does everybody agree that that is the meaning and the definition of risk that we're going to use? So risk is the one that we see all the time in just about every model, right, Dan?
Yeah, and the sad thing is you often see it in a spreadsheet in a cell. And it's just like, you get this much room to define it. No, what and just what do you see? You see what you want to see. So you just impose your own interpretation on the words in the little box. So ambiguity is our enemy. We need to work together to kind of make things clearly defined, right?
Agreed. And so when I create definitions in a model, I might have a half a page or a full page definition of what it means. But once I have that, I am ready to rock and roll. Okay. And so that's the thing. But for organizations that have never done that, it's often shocking when they find out that the other stakeholders have a different view or a different caveat on what something means. And that will hang things up later. So we're going to take a polling question here just to see where you are on this definition. My organization has common definitions documented in writing for important organizational terms. My organization has common definitions documented in writing for important organizational terms. 1, 100% true. 2, 75% true. 3, 50% true. 4, we have long, unproductive meetings. All right, so interesting results here. And I will share. So we see here that we have one very happy person that says 100% true. So whoever you are, congratulations. We have 2 that are 75% true, 51% that are 50% true, and 41% that say they have long, unproductive meetings. And that's the beauty of the definitions. Not only does it help with decision-making, but all of the misunderstandings that go on in meetings gets resolved when you can have those definitions. So how analytic hierarchy process can be used. I can compare projects head to head. Okay, so these are some scores from a NASA model. NASA is a government agency. I can share these scores. Private clients, I don't do that. All right, so if you look at these things for each one of these factors, safety of the public, safety of the crew, workforce, capital assets, and all the factors below that, exists a half page or more definition on what that means. All right, and so that was created to make sure that we had that understanding. And you can see that if something is scored well for safety of the public, then almost automatically it was going to get funded. That was the top priority. I love to kid my NASA colleagues about cost savings. Look at where cost showed up. 3%. No, they don't care about cost when it comes to these other factors. And just 2 things I want to share here. A benefit of published values like this, these values were created and then published. A benefit of that is that people don't bring you projects that they know that are not going to score well. All right, and so that saves time right there. The other benefit is that then people are looking for projects that line up with the values. All right, so that is also a benefit. And the first time I did this with this team, when we created these values, it was real funny for me as a facilitator, because when the values showed up, they didn't like them. They did not like the values. And they went so far as to demand as a group that they vote again. And I said, okay, so we'll vote again. And we went through the entire voting process again, and it was all I could do to stand up straight, because I could tell by as the votes came in that the values showed up essentially the same at the second time. And that's when they said, we need to understand why these are our values. And they spent a couple of hours getting that understanding, and they were their values, and then they understood it. And values are often, I don't want to call them counterintuitive, but when you see the scores that show up with them, then it makes people think and understand about why those were those values. And once they thought about the numbers, then they really understood that, yes, these are our values. And that's kind of standard. So in this scenario here, we compared projects head to head, but we also had what we called a gold standard project. A gold standard project was a project that we considered was almost a perfect project. And when new projects came along in the next fiscal year, we didn't compare projects head to head anymore. We compared them to the gold standard. All right. And so every project got compared to the gold standard. And then we were able to establish a baseline score that basically said, we'll never fund a project that scores less than this. All right, we would go back to previous projects that we didn't fund and say, we're going to score that, we're going to fund that project, because just because this project is new, we had one we didn't fund last year based on the budget requirements, and we're going to do it from this point of view. So any comments on this?
Actually, yeah. So one quick story, actually, from my point of view, Dave, is we had one customer, a European utility company, and about 4 years before we got involved with them, they'd gone through a big change. They'd gone from being a government department to being a government-owned private company, right? So suddenly they had the profit and loss accountability rather than just being saying a government department. And to make that change, the CEO had put in place this real regime where he kind of really hammered into everybody, business value first, business value first, business value first, business value first. Anyway, fast forward 4 years, and they adopted AHP to do their prioritization. They went through it. Where did business value come? Fifth on the list, right? And they said, whoa, wait a minute, that's wrong, right? So they did again, exactly what you described, right? The results came out exactly the same, business value fifth. And it was that moment they all realized that they kind of got into this sort of groupthink metaphor where they'd said it so often that they just said it. They didn't really believe it. It didn't really reflect the values that they had as an organization. But it was the right message to get them through that transition into going from government department to company, right? But they'd moved on from there. So it's not enough to do this once and then say, yeah, we've done it, right? We've got to revisit this periodically, typically every year or so. Your strategy shouldn't be changing so quickly. You need to review this every 6 weeks, but typically every year or so, you should repeat this process and really make sure your values are still the same values. The business drivers are still the same business drivers as before.
And it's true. In the absence of priority, people get distracted. They focus on different things. I had a very similar experience where I was called in to consult, and they had a brand new leader, and the brand new leader said he wanted to do the first couple of days because he was new, and I was only going to do day 3. And I said, you're paying me for all 3 days? He said, yes. And I said, I'll sit here the first 2 days, no problem. All right. And so the first 2 days, they argued all about issue A. For 2 days on day 3, I prioritized the issue, and issue A was at the bottom. And so they spent 2 days wasting on that. Issue A was very irritating. It just wasn't important. All right. And so this is one thing we have to focus on, what's important. This example here, checklist for priorities for quick screening. AHP was used to create this priority list. This was an organization that has a global organization that has equipment all over the world. All right. And when you replace equipment, then that's a mini project. And so how can they prioritize all of that? And what they did is they created a checklist for the technicians where they would go and rate it on a scale on each one of these factors. All right. And when they would rate it on the scale, then they didn't necessarily see the weighting. Then the weighting was used to decide what machinery they were going to upgrade or replace. And that is the way they chose to do it. I highlighted collateral damage here because collateral damage meant that if it breaks something else with it. All right. And so this is something that not only, it just doesn't, if you lose this function, it may lose something else's function. And I highlighted equipment age and general condition because in most cases, when people talk about replacing equipment, what's the first thing they say? Look, what is old? What's in bad shape? But look at where it came on the rating scale, last. All right. And this is why sometimes when you prioritize things based on values, it can be counterintuitive to the quick judgment that people normally make. And so the second one there was skills availability was, do we have somebody with the skills? Does somebody exist on the planet with the skills that can actually fix it? If there's nobody that can fix it because it's that old, then it's something that should be higher priority. All right. And so this was something that they used with great success to prioritize what equipment they should replace, because unless your organization is unique, odds are very high you're not spending as much on maintenance as you would like to do. And then it becomes even more critical that you focus on that area. And even if you're in an IT arena, this same kind of thing can be done to talk about what things need to get upgraded and replaced, or what programs need to get upgraded and replaced. All right, so on ways to address cost of alternatives, three basic ways. I've used the first two: normalization, prioritization within cost groups. And I'll explain normalization with an example. Yes, you can get a copy of the slide deck. It will be posted. All right, so this is something that I did with a client, and I'll explain the normalization. In the first column there, the raw AHP score. All right, that is what the projects actually scored. All right, so, but there's a budget for the project. And so with normalization, I can involve a reference cost. I can have a reference cost at 100% or whatever. Once I have that reference cost, then I can do a benefit cost ratio. And so that's what I've done here. So this particular score, 31%, is actually ranked 24th based on AHP scores, but it only costs $700,000. So compared to the reference cost, which this organization had a budget of $32 million for this fiscal year, this was its benefits cost ratio. So it turned out to be the number one project that they would do. If you look at the number one scoring project from an AHP point of view, scored 65% on the values. However, it cost $13 million. And therefore, when we did the benefit cost ratio, that's what the benefit cost ratio was from a normalization point of view. So they also went through, just because something is high, they set a threshold of 30%. In other words, we're not going to fund it if it scores less than 30% on the value chain because it's not providing enough value. And so this was out, this was out, this was out, and this was out. And so therefore they were able to take that money and then look at what they could fund beyond that. And so all I'm saying is AHP gives you a score, but then you have to look at how much budget do we have? How do we get the most bang for the buck? And from this point of view, this is what they did. And this made them very happy. Just very interesting. A lot of interesting things show up in the prioritization process, but I can't share their business here. But yes, interesting things happen. But this is just a very good way to make sure that you are getting the most value overall for the dollars that you have.
And I can't underscore that last point enough, James. Like many people think that once you've got a score, that's it. You use that score, right? But no, it's the value for money, bang for the buck, call it whatever you like, right? It's that efficiency of using your most critical resource. It's not always money, by the way. If you have if your key constraint is your architects, right? If you're running an IT organization, if your IT architects are your key constraint, then work out value divided by the amount of architect time that project would take, right? And that'll give you another way of optimizing your portfolio. So it's value for whatever, usually it's money. 99% of the time it's money, but sometimes it's something else.
And I
But
agree
don't just
wholeheartedly with
take the
that.
score.
I agree wholeheartedly with that, Stuart, because I'm a big believer in theory of constraints and the goal. And if you know what your most constrained resource is, then that is what you need to make sure you maximize the value of that, because all the other stuff won't matter as much if you don't take care of that.
You got it, 100%.
All right, I can also prioritize projects within logical cost groups. All right, because sometimes it's unfair to compare a project that costs $600,000 with a project that costs $35 million. And so I like to look at it like this. Whatever my logical cost groups are, in this case, the example I'm showing you here is, what are we going to fund? What are the top 10 projects under $1 million? What are the top 10 projects from $1 million to 10 million? What are the top 10 that are greater than 10 million? So whatever those are, then that's what we want to make sure we do. And then I prioritize these, or I still do the benefit cost analysis within the cost groups. All right. And then I think about how much money should we spend on small projects. All right. Because small projects can often provide a lot of value, but in large organizations, especially, people sometimes don't bring forward very small projects just because they don't want to go through the process and the overhead. Whereas if we set aside money specifically for that, then we can allocate that to it.
And similarly, you might create different buckets, not just by the size of the project, but by the intent. So BAU or run the business type projects could be in a different bucket to your grow the business or transform the business projects, because the values in those different areas are different, right? And run the business, it tends to be about reducing operational risk, reducing cost, increasing efficiency, those kind of things. And grow the business, it tends to be about focus more on customer and product and things like that. So you might use different criteria in different parts of the portfolio. That's okay. You then have an allocation challenge to make sure you're then allocating resources between those different buckets. So it's not just the size. It could be different intent that you have for the portfolios as well.
Yeah, I was to say, Jay, we started borrowing a little bit from the world of econometrics in this, in terms of looking at the efficient frontier, the kind of the Pareto distribution, where you're kind of asking yourself, if you've got 3 different portfolios, which one's going to spend the next dollar best? So you're looking at who's going to deliver you that best bang for your buck in terms of sort of the next best project.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, because I think that's something that you have to set from a strategic point of view, because if you don't set it, then you'll err on one side or the other too much, because there are people that they want to hold, the organization wants to hold on to doing a lot of maintenance, or they want to hold on to doing a lot of new work without doing maintenance, and it's something that should be strategically set by the leadership and then prioritized within those groups. I agree wholeheartedly with that. All right, so with the pitfalls here, number one for me is failure to keep it simple. I don't know if that's because I've done a lot of work with technical people and they want to make everything ultra complicated sometimes, and it doesn't have to be. All right, so when poor communication, this gets where do we take the time to do the definitions? And sometimes there's predetermined outcomes. It's happened to me. I'm sure it's probably happened to Stuart or Dan, where somebody tells you, this is the decision I want, please justify it. All right, and so sometimes that happens. And the other aspect here is lack of buy-in, where you want to exclude people from the process, or you want to rush the process, or poor facilitation skills. There is some digestion, even though the process itself is not complicated, but there is some digestion that people have to have, where they have to digest it, the results and the process, and then that's what helps you get acceptance. Because otherwise, if you don't allow for digestion, then it's going to do. Sometimes people want to also be secret. I did some work with the school system, and the school board members, they loved it. They wanted to vote, but they didn't want their priorities to be public. So I got secret ballots from the school system board members, because they were politicians and they did not want any public vote or any public person to know what they actually valued. So they wanted to operate on both sides of the issue. We'll do this final poll here to see where we are. My organization primarily selects projects based on 1, financial measures like ROI, 2, value-based assessments. 3, leadership discussions. 4, moon phase. All right, the choices again, financial measures like ROI. 2, value-based assessments. 3, leadership discussions. 4, moon phase.
Hey, Stuart, where are we on that that module to bring moon phase into our into the software? I like that.
Yeah, I think that's a new one for David to build.
All right, I'll share the results here. So we have 27% that say financial measures like ROI. I'm very pleased to say that we have 18% that say value-based assessments. 50% say leadership discussions. There's nothing wrong with leadership discussions, but I would say there's a lot of risk there because often certain leaders bias the discussion, certain points aren't made. There's many opportunities to end up in the wrong direction without the structure of AHP. AHP is like a leadership discussion. It's just structured to make sure everything is done in a forthright manner is what I would say.
Absolutely. And James, one of the things that you talked about with the AHP helping get the leaders to buy in, right? That's really, really important. Because Eric just mentioned, I'll read this out. So that one of the reasons for this great disengagement is that some executives he's worked with are just eager to work on tech projects. Now, if people really buy into the process and they really buy into the model that you've used to score them, and your project turns out to be a dog, right? It turns out to be really poor value for money. What we usually see, and I'd be interested if you've seen this as well, is that historically people would go and defend their pet project. But because there's a value-based model, the opposite happens, right? They can't run away fast enough from those bad projects because they know they'd be trying to defend something that's indefensible and nobody wants to do that, right? So I don't know if you've seen that, but we've seen that a bunch of times.
Not only have I seen it, I've had people say to me, I never would have thought my leadership could come to agreement on these kinds of things before, that they were shocked at how the leaders were able to respond with regard to that. And the other thing I would say, one of the people that can benefit from the most, organizations I've seen benefit the most are the IT organizations that are IT service organizations. If I was CIO of an organization that provided IT services, I would never prioritize my own projects. I bring in the customers and the customers establish the value structure and prioritize the project. And then that way I don't always have whining customers coming to me about when am I going to get their thing done, because hey, you were part of the value structure, you created it, we prioritize the project based on the value structure, and this is what it is. And so this is one of the things we want to make sure that you want to do. So the bottom line here, once the value structure is defined, the selection process is fast. This is where I would disagree with something Stuart said earlier. I've had clients that use value structures 4 or 5 years, but I must say that it wasn't high-tech clients. But that the values, once that value structure was created, a particular PMO I dealt with, their company used that value structure to do things well beyond the scope that it was initially defined for, to go out and establish other things that are out there. All right. The amount of time politicking, we just did with that. People stopped politicking once they had the input into the value structure, they saw the results, it was understandable. And you get the 3 C's of a good decision: consistency, credibility, consensus. With that, I am all done with the prepared slides. I'll be happy to address any questions that anybody may have at this point in time.
So James, what would you say is the biggest challenge that you face trying to implement an AHP-based prioritization process?
The biggest challenge is to sometimes get a leader to participate that doesn't want to participate, or they want to send a very junior staff member to represent them, not recognizing the significance of what's going to transpire once these values are established. and then they want to try to get a hiccup later. So I work very hard to make sure that I get the leadership at the right level to participate in the creation of the value structure. I might have lower level people help me create the definitions and all of that, but for the actual voting of the values, I want the higher level people as high as I can get to participate, because once they do it and that's it, then they buy in. I don't have to go and defend the results to them later.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, we've seen people take all the same scoring data. Yeah, they'd have a really fancy scoring spreadsheet, take all the same scoring data and fail to make a good decision. You end up with 20% resources allocated to that project and all the rest of it. And then literally take the same criteria and the same scoring data for the projects, but do it through AHP. And just going through that pairwise comparison process means that the executives have a chance to understand where that model comes from, buy into it, where literally in the course of an hour, they went from having no agreement to having complete agreement on what they should be doing. And it can be that quick. Like that buy-in that you're talking about really matters, but you've got to get those senior people in the room.
Yeah.
So we've got a question from Christine. Is it helpful to spend time expectations setting ahead of key AHP discussions with leaders and provide prep materials for their review? So is there a sort of best practice you can talk us through in terms of warming people up for that discussion, James?
Yes, it's very helpful. I like to explain the process to them. I don't want to overwhelm them because often they're very busy, but I give them what I would call a cheat sheet that says these are the basics that you need to know. This is how it's going to work. This is how it's going to transpire. And these are the results that we're going to expect when we're done. I make myself available if they're going to have questions, because, my experience has been if I've got 5 different leaders, 1 or 2 of those may have lots of questions. The others, they'll accept your credibility on faith and they're going to show up and do their job. But I can't shortchange any of them. So I will deal with the people that demand more, and I will not bother the people that demand less. All right. But I do provide everybody the baseline of experience. Just like when I take my little kid to school for the first time in kindergarten, the night before I say, hey, your teacher is nice. I'm going to show them the room and all of that. So when I drop them off, they're good to go. It's the same thing with these leaders. I don't hit them cold with this. I get them all ready and set, and then let them do their thing.
And the first time you do this, right? When you're doing these pairwise comparisons, the first one is going to take a while they get their head around it, right? The second one will be a bit quicker, and the third. So I'm trying to get to kind of question, Stephen, really getting into it. So it takes people a little while just to get their heads around this new way of working. But typically, I mean, we had the CEO of one of the biggest insurance companies walk out of a meeting, they're doing the pairwise comparisons and say, "Oh, finally, we're having a discussion we should have had years ago because we've got this AHP structure behind it." Sorry, Dan, you were going to say something.
Well, I've got the next question coming in. So I'm going to say how to organize the process of developing a value structure across different P&Ls that are competing for the same central resource. So the model of models question. I love this question. I'm going to hand it to James, though, before we throw in our answer.
All right. I can tell you're chomping at the bit to throw in your answer, so I'll be brief. First, I would say this is the exact criteria where AHP is required, where you have shared resources among different P&Ls. That is where you really need to have it under. And what you have to do is you have to get the leaders of the different P&Ls together to establish the value structure, in my opinion. And then once they establish that value structure and the criteria, then you go from there, because it's not going to end up being fair once you put the value structures. Whereas if you have different P&Ls, somebody's going to feel like they're cheated if you don't go through AHP. But if you go through AHP, somebody's going to not get the resources that they think they were going to get, but they will understand why. And my experience has always been, if they have that understanding, they can go along with the program. But if they don't have that understanding, then they'll fight tooth and nail.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to show people that the process is fair, that it's analytical. I think in our experience, people are okay with hearing no if they know that the guy next to them hasn't done something kind of sneaky to get his projects in their place. So they need to know the process is reliable. And then yeah, in terms of the criteria, you can't compare everything with everything in one model. So it's having those buckets and that structure, but knowing that each one has its own efficient frontier, its own ranking. So you're using your resources where you get the best bang for your buck.
Absolutely. And we've got specific tools to do that. We could spend the next 20 minutes on that, Dan, but let's keep going. So we've got a couple other questions.
Yeah.
One is about risk. How do you incorporate risk into the model? Thanks, Ashok. Good to see you again, man. James, how would you incorporate risk? And I guess the first question, obviously, whenever somebody says risk, is how do you define risk?
Yeah.
So let's assume it's execution risk of the project. Which I think is right.
You may recall, and I don't know if I can go back there, but in one of the slides I had for this one, there was something called ease of implementation. Ease of implementation was basically execution risk. You know, if it's something easy to do, then we want to do it. If it's something that's very execution risk challenge, then that's where it would get evaluated. So depending upon how you define risk, as Stuart mentioned, we would include it in the model. Once we have that definition, then we can include it. And from this point of view, some people had very good ideas, but if we couldn't implement it in 3 years because of the execution challenges or the risk challenges, then it was something that wouldn't score well from that point of view.
Right, questions coming thick and fast. How to smoothly present the values and benefits of AHP to top management to get their buy-in on AHP decision, and purchase of transparent choice tool. I love that question, Francois. We didn't place it ourselves, but maybe James, you could you can maybe take the lead on the best way to present AHP, and we can follow up a little bit about the tool.
One of the things I'm guilty of, Dan, is I'm not a good salesperson. I mean, I'm an engineer. I tell them these are the facts. It works. It's simple. It's used by government and private sector,
yeah.
and hopefully they buy into it. The pushback that I see more is because that when you have leaders that don't want to be accountable, because AHP drives accountability, that you're going to suddenly get results and they just can't have something for nothing anymore. And that's more the pushback than not necessarily that they don't want to do it because it is a good tool.
Yeah. So you can sort of sell the dream, if you like, in a number of different ways. I was just looking at a piece we did recently with Laura Barnard on the PMO, and he goes, the PMO, if the current PMO, if the role's not delivering what leadership want, then the way you're doing it now doesn't work. So if as a leadership team, if you want your strategy to be executed better, you've got to be prepared to change. And, you know, AHP is an enabler for that change. In terms of presenting things, we believe in making all this amazing maths, psychology capability associated with AHP as simple as possible to the end user. So just a silly example, really. We've taken the inconsistency ratio, which is a relatively complex mathematical thing involving eigenvectors, and we've turned it into an emoji. So if you've got an inconsistent score as a participant, you get a big red grumpy face. And we explain that by saying you don't agree with yourself. So you need to go back and look at your work again, but trying to keep it really human and simple. Because at the end of the day, we're here to help humans make better decisions. And so we want to make, in the software, what we try and do is make all this good stuff really easy for normal humans to consume.
Perfect. So Francois and anybody else who would like to know how to sell the idea to their execs, we actually have a bunch of materials that we can share with you afterwards. I pasted a link where you can actually go ahead and schedule time in my calendar. And if you can't wait a week and a couple of days, because I'm on vacation this week and next week, you can just drop Dan a note, and you can type his email address in, drop Dan a quick note, and he'll point you in the right direction to download those materials. So on that, I think we're right at the top of the hour. So I want to just thank you, James, for agreeing to come on. And again, after let's not wait another 6 or 7 years before doing this again. Really appreciate the time. You got a great way of very clearly and simply getting across why this stuff matters and how to get it done in the real world. And I can tell from the comments in the comments that from the chat there that everybody else has really enjoyed it as well. So thank you very much for coming and being our speaker today. Everybody who joined, thank you very much for coming. If you want to learn more about how to get started with AHP, do head over to our website. In the resources section, there's a bunch of materials to get you going. We even have the ability for you to access a trial of the software. We do ask you to spend a bit of time with Dan first, just to talk to you, really, no other reason. But we do ask you to spend a bit of time with Dan first, just to make sure that you know which buttons to press, all that kind of good stuff. And then we're happy to set you up with a trial of the software, so you can see how it works for you. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Dan, have I missed anything?
No, it's great. So, guys, when you signed up to the webinar, there were a bunch of little handy links. I think we've shared a couple of them on this on the chat, but actually there's a link should be sitting there, I think, on the thank you page. Stuart doesn't know this, but we just put some new slides up to kind of like help you sell AHP to your leaders. We do these kind of things when he's not looking. So use those, use us, because ultimately we believe in this stuff. We're very grateful that James is here to help us learn more about it, and we want to help it become a real thing where you are.